Sweat dripped down Ragnar's temple as he thrashed on the damp straw, his body convulsing as if possessed by unseen demons. The black mark on his chest, the one he had received from Hela, pulsed with a supernatural glow in the cabin's dimness. His screams tore through the silence of the night, while the visions tormented him for the 100th time. The faces of the children and women he had massacred during his last Berserker frenzy. He yanked the protective amulet from his neck and threw it against the wall. "Let me die," he shouted into the void. "Just let me die already." Thank you for being here and watching this story unfold. This channel is just starting its journey, and every subscription truly means the world to us. It helps keep this project alive and pushes us closer to our first 1,000 subscribers. If you enjoy the content, please consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let us know which city you're watching from. Your support fuels these stories, and together, we'll explore the depths of Viking honor, struggle, and fate. Before the first light of dawn had touched the horizon, long before the shadows began to dissolve beneath the pale fingers of morning, Ragnar Skullcrusher lay awake in the cold stillness of his cabin. The rough texture of the wooden walls pressed close, the faint scent of moss and smoke lingering in the air. Outside, the wind whispered through the skeletal branches of bare trees, carrying the promise of another relentless winter day in Kattegat's outskirts. Within the cramped space, the flicker of a small dying fire cast restless shadows across the rough-hewn beams and the thin animal pelts he used as bedding. Ragnar's breath came uneven, his chest rising and falling with shallow gulps as he sat on the edge of his bed. His eyes, sharp and piercing as ever despite the heavy veil of exhaustion, scanned the dimness. The black mark on his chest, barely visible beneath the threadbare tunic, throbbed faintly, a constant reminder of what had come upon him. It was as if the darkness beneath his skin pulsed in rhythm with the beating of his heart, a living thing born of Hela's cold touch. At 32 winters, Ragnar was a man carved by battle and fate alike. His hair, streaked with dark blonde and tangled in haphazard braids, fell around his scarred face, framing the jagged lines etched by years of war and anger. His body bore the map of his life, tattooed runes curling along sinewy arms, jagged scars from steel and fire crossing his torso like reminders of every fight, every fury unleashed. Muscles rippled beneath pale skin, but the tremor in his hands betrayed the restless storm within. The room smelled faintly of damp earth and wood smoke, mingled with the sharp tang of metal from the axe that lay in a corner, its blade dulled from use. A small pile of chopped logs waited patiently near the hearth, promising warmth but offering little comfort. Outside, the first caws of ravens broke the silence, their cries echoing over the frost-bitten fields. For 6 months, this cabin had been both sanctuary and prison. After the blood-soaked massacre in the Saxon village, after the terrible frenzy that had claimed lives he could no longer remember to repent for, Ragnar had retreated from the world. The men of Kattegat, once his brothers in battle, now looked on him with a mixture of fear and disdain. The whispers in the mead hall spoke of a man cursed beyond saving, a berserker who had lost the line between beast and warrior. He had not left this place except for the briefest moments, when the need for water or firewood forced him into the cold, gray world beyond the trees. His days were marked only by the sharp edge of solitude and the constant torment of memories that clawed at his mind like ravenous wolves. The brand of Hela burned beneath his skin, a cruel emblem that no blade could sever. Ragnar ran a rough hand over his face, the coarse beard bristling beneath his fingers. His lips were cracked and dry, his eyes heavy with the weight of endless sleepless nights. Every muscle ached, not just from wounds past, but from the tension of a mind that refused to rest. Sleep had become a battleground where demons danced, each nightmare a cruel reenactment of his madness. The fire sputtered weakly, and Ragnar rose, his bare feet meeting the cold wooden floor with a dull thud. He crossed the room toward a small wooden table where a worn leather pouch lay. From it, he pulled a small, roughly carved amulet, an old talisman meant to protect him from the spirits that sought to claim his soul. Normally, he wore it close to his heart, but lately, even that small comfort seemed hollow. Tonight, as his fingers closed around it, a surge of frustration welled within him. He crushed the amulet tightly until it nearly slipped through his fingers, then tossed it roughly onto the table. The sound echoed sharply in the silence. Against the rough wood, the talisman lay still, powerless. His mind spiraled back to the moments when madness first took hold, the first time the black mark blazed beneath his flesh and the rage exploded from within like a storm unleashed. Outside, the soft crunch of footsteps stirred the quiet night. Ragnar's gaze shifted toward the window, the faint glow of a lantern bobbing through the trees. The figure approached steadily, a silhouette against the snow-dusted ground. Sigrid. His sister's footsteps were measured, a steady cadence that somehow grounded him. She was the only tether left to a past life he no longer recognized, the sole voice of reason when the darkness threatened to consume completely. Though she carried the weight of worry in her eyes, she never faltered in her care. For all her gentle demeanor, she was forged in the same unforgiving fires of their world. The door creaked softly as she entered, her presence filling the cabin with a subtle warmth. She carried a small basket, the faint scent of fresh bread and sweet honey lingering in the air behind her. Her pale blonde hair was braided tightly, the intricate pattern reflecting the discipline she held within. "Good morning," she said softly, setting the basket down. Her voice was calm, but carried an edge of urgency. "I brought you bread and meat. You need your strength, Ragnar." He nodded slowly, the rough edges of gratitude caught beneath layers of despair. "Thank you," he rasped, his voice hoarse from disuse. Sigrid's eyes searched his face, noting the deep shadows and the way his hands trembled slightly as he reached for the food. "You have not eaten well these past days. You must not let yourself wither here." Ragnar's gaze drifted to the small window, where the gray light began to seep into the sky. "I am not the man I was," he murmured. "Not anymore." She stepped closer, her voice dropping to a whisper. "You are still my brother, and you are still a warrior. Though the gods may have turned their backs, we must still stand." The words barely settled before Sigrid's tone shifted to one more pressing. "There is news from Thorkell. He returned from the east with his men. He calls for all warriors to join him against the Franks." Ragnar's eyes narrowed. The name Thorkell alone was like a jagged stone in his gut. The man was no mere chieftain. He was a fanatic wrapped in the cruelty of Odin's darkest whispers. His obsession with honor and victory had spilled blood beyond reason. "I cannot fight," Ragnar said, voice low and bitter. "Not like this." Sigrid looked at him sharply. "Thorkell does not ask. He commands. He threatens to name you a Nithling if you refuse." The word hung heavy in the air. Nithling, a curse worse than death. To be declared without honor was to become a ghost among men, a target for any seeking glory or vengeance. Ragnar swallowed hard, the cold dread settling in his bones. The fight within him was no longer just about steel and blood. It was about the fragile threads that held his life together, now frayed and strained to breaking. He rose, pacing the small room, the weight of his predicament pressing down with unbearable force. Outside, the wind moaned through the cracks in the walls, a mournful sound that mirrored the turmoil in his soul. Suddenly, a faint noise, softer than the wind, pulled him from his thoughts. A child's cry, muffled and desperate, drifted through the trees near his cabin. His blood chilled. He moved carefully toward the door, the scent of fear sharp on the frosty air. Behind a cluster of bushes, huddled and shivering, was a small figure, a girl no older than 10, her dark hair tangled and streaked with dirt. Her eyes, wide and haunted, met his with a silent plea. The cabin became a fragile sanctuary as Ragnar offered Runa the last of his bread and a rough woolen cloak. Her small hands trembled as she ate, and outside, the forest held its breath. As dawn broke, the distant sound of horses and the harsh calls of men shattered the fragile peace. Thorkell's forces edged closer, their intent clear. Ragnar stood, his chest bare, the black mark glowing faintly beneath his skin. The storm was coming, and with it, the choice that would forever alter the path he walked. The night air hung heavy with frost and silence, broken only by the faint rustling of dry leaves and the distant howl of a lone wolf. Ragnar stood at the threshold of his cabin, the worn wooden door creaking softly in the cold breeze. His breath came in uneven puffs, forming pale clouds that vanished quickly into the darkness. The faint glow from the dying fire inside barely penetrated the thick shadows gathering in the forest beyond the small clearing. His heart pounded, an irregular drumbeat that echoed the turmoil within. The weight of the black mark pressed deep into his chest, as if the very darkness beneath his skin sought to drag him into an abyss from which there was no return. The nightmares had worsened in recent nights, each one more vivid, more merciless. The screams of the fallen, the haunted faces of children and women, images etched into his soul, relentless and unforgiving. Then came the sound, a soft, stifled cry, fragile and trembling like a leaf caught in a storm. It was almost swallowed by the night, but it pierced through Ragnar's numbness like an arrow through armor. He froze, muscles taut and senses sharpened by years of battle and survival. The cry repeated, an urgent plea, desperate and raw. Ragnar's mind wrestled with instinct and reason. To approach meant risk of betrayal, danger, the wrath of Thorkell. But to ignore was to turn his back on something human, something fragile that stirred a long-buried part of himself. The berserker inside him snarled, demanding isolation and self-preservation. Yet another voice, quieter but stronger, whispered of honor and mercy. Slowly, cautiously, Ragnar stepped away from the door. The snow crunched beneath his bare feet, cold biting at his calloused soles. He moved toward the sound, each step a battle against the dread tightening in his chest. The forest loomed like ancient sentinels, gnarled branches clawing at the sky, shadows twisting like spirits in torment. Behind a cluster of brambles and frost-coated bushes, he saw her, a small figure huddled against the earth, wrapped in tattered linen that did little to fend off the cold. Her dark hair hung in tangled strands over a face pale and streaked with dirt and tears. Her hands, trembling and bruised, bore the faint marks of rope, the cruel evidence of captivity. Ragnar's breath hitched. For a moment, he simply watched, silent, uncertain, battling the tempest inside. The girl looked up, eyes wide and haunted, reflecting the moonlight like twin shards of shattered glass. There was a vulnerability there that pierced beyond his armor of bitterness and rage. "Who are you?" he whispered, his voice rough like gravel. He remained still, wary, unwilling to close the distance too quickly. The fear in his voice was not just for himself, but for her, for what harboring her might bring. "My name is Runa," the girl answered, her voice barely more than a breath, yet carrying the weight of fear and resolve. "I escaped from Thorkell's men." Ragnar felt a cold spike of something sharp slice through his chest. Thorkell, the name alone stirred memories of iron and fire, of blood spilled in the name of fanaticism and twisted honor. To shelter one of his captives was a death sentence, an act of defiance no man survived lightly. "Why did you run? What do you seek here?" Ragnar's question was edged with suspicion, but softened by a flicker of compassion. "They want to sacrifice me," Runa said, voice trembling but fierce. "Before the battle. To Odin. To ensure the gods favor them. Sacrifice, the ancient rites of blood and fire, long faded into shadow, now resurrected by Thorkell's ruthless zealotry. The thought sent a shiver down Ragnar's spine. He knew the price of such fanaticism. He had seen the faces of those lost to senseless fury, and now a child was to be offered as tribute to a god demanding death. His mind raced. To aid her was to place a target on his back. Thorkell's fury was no idle threat. It was a tempest that consumed all who dared oppose him. Yet to abandon her was a betrayal of something more profound, the fragile remnants of his own humanity. Ragnar's hands closed into fists, knuckles white against the cold. He felt the dark pulse beneath his skin as if the mark itself was responding to the choice before him. The Berserker's rage whispered seductively, "Kill, destroy, survive alone." But beneath the storm, deeper than the hunger for blood, a flicker of something else stirred, something softer, yet no less fierce. "I cannot promise safety," Ragnar said finally, voice low and conflicted. "If Thorkell finds you here, he will." Runa's eyes met his, unwavering. "But if you leave me to them, the curse will never end. The mark on your chest will bind you forever." The words hung heavy between them. Ragnar instinctively touched the black mark peeking beneath his tunic. It pulsed faintly, a living shadow etched into his flesh, a reminder of death's cold embrace. For so long, he had seen it as a curse, a sentence to endless torment and isolation. But now, through Runa's gaze, it seemed to hold a different meaning, an unspoken promise, a key to something beyond the darkness. "I don't know if I have the strength to fight this," he confessed, voice barely audible. "To control what lurks within me." "You do," Runa said, stepping closer despite the chill. Her small hands trembled but were steady as she reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from his face. "My mother was a Volva. She taught me that some curses are gifts in disguise, that those touched by darkness hold a light others cannot see." Ragnar felt a warmth, faint but real, spread through his chest. The restless storm inside him stilled for a moment, as if tethered by an invisible thread. The girl's presence was an anchor, a fragile hope amid the encroaching night. A sudden crack shattered the fragile silence, the unmistakable sound of approaching footsteps, heavy and determined. Ragnar's gaze snapped toward the forest's edge, where a flicker of torchlight bobbed through the trees. The voices of men, gruff and commanding, carried on the cold wind. Ragnar's skull crusher. The voice was harsh, familiar, and full of menace. "We know you harbor the girl. Surrender her now, and maybe you will keep what honor remains." The threat was clear and immediate. Thorkell's men were closing in, their fury as relentless as the biting winter. Ragnar's breath quickened, his muscles coiled like a spring ready to unleash. The Berserker within stirred, hunger and rage mingling with the fragile thread of control he barely held. He looked to Runa, who had shrunk back into the shadows, eyes wide but resolute. Despite the fear etched into her young face, she stood firm, a silent challenge to the darkness that sought to claim them both. "There is no time," Ragnar murmured, voice tight with urgency. "If I leave, you may find a chance to flee." "No," she whispered, shaking her head with quiet determination. "If you give me to them, the mark of Hela will chain you forever. But if you protect me, I can help you master the fury inside." The promise in her words was fragile, yet powerful. For the first time in months, Ragnar felt a flicker of purpose pierce the haze of despair. Protecting this child was not just an act of mercy, it was a battle for his soul. Behind them, the pounding of boots grew louder, the heavy steps of warriors who saw only a berserker broken and a girl to be sacrificed. The door of the cabin trembled under the first blow of a mighty shoulder. Ragnar's chest rose and fell, the mark throbbing like a pulse of darkness and light intertwined. He stepped forward, bare-chested and unyielding, eyes blazing with a fierce new resolve. "She is under my protection," he declared, voice steady despite the storm raging within. The roar of laughter and scorn met his defiance. Thorkell's voice rang out. Runa sat with her knees drawn close, wrapped in the thin, tattered linen that offered little protection against the biting cold. Her dark hair fell in tangled strands over her pale face, smeared with streaks of dirt and dampness. The faint marks of ropes still bruised her wrists, visible beneath the worn sleeves of her dress. Her eyes, large, gray, and hauntingly serious, met his with a mixture of fear and fragile hope. Ragnar hesitated, the weight of his decisions pressing down like an iron stone on his chest. For months, he had lived as a ghost, a man shackled by a curse darker than any blade, haunted by horrors he could barely bear to remember. Yet here, in the fragile presence of this child, something stirred, an ember of connection, faint but unyielding. He crossed to the hearth, the fire's warmth reaching out like a timid invitation. From a crude wooden shelf, he fetched a rough woolen blanket, the coarse fibers prickling against his skin. Kneeling beside Runa, he gently draped it over her shoulders, careful not to startle her. The girl's body shivered beneath the fabric, her breath shallow, eyes fixed on the flickering flames. "Eat," Ragnar said quietly, breaking the silence with a voice rough from disuse. He set a small loaf of bread and a wooden cup filled with mead on the floor before her. The bread was dense and bland, yet to Runa, it seemed a feast. She took the bread with trembling hands, tearing pieces quickly, hunger evident in each bite. As she ate, Ragnar watched, the edges of his roughened face softening for a moment. He could see the exhaustion etched into the delicate frame, the way her fingers trembled as they reached for the mead. Slowly, she took a small sip, and the warmth seemed to chase away some of the cold that clung to her bones. The fire crackled, filling the space with a steady rhythm. Words hovered on the edge of the air between them, hesitant, unspoken. In the quiet, their breaths mingled, ragged and uneven, yet strangely synchronized. Ragnar found himself drawn to the child's resilience, the way she met his gaze without flinching despite the terror that must have gripped her soul. "You speak our tongue well," he finally said, eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Not many children from the East learn the Old Norse as you do." Runa paused, swallowing the last piece of bread before nodding slowly. "My mother was a Volva," she replied, voice steady but low. "She taught me the old ways, the runes, the language of the spirits." Ragnar's gaze flickered to the faint tattoos on the palms of her hands, tiny runes etched in dark lines, each one a symbol of protection or power. Such markings were rare, often reserved for those steeped in the ancient mysteries. His heart tightened, realizing the depth of the child's heritage and the weight of what she carried. "Your blood is not common," he murmured, his voice a mix of awe and caution. "That is why Thorkell wants you." Runa's eyes darkened with a shadow of sorrow. "He believes my sacrifice will grant him Odin's favor." The words hung heavy in the air, thick with the scent of death and desperation. Ragnar clenched his fists, the familiar pulse beneath his skin stirring, a reminder of the darkness that dwelled within him, a reflection of the cold void that Thorkell sought to command. Yet here, in this small cabin, surrounded by the hush of winter and the fragile warmth of the fire, a different kind of battle began to unfold. It was not fought with axes or swords, but with glances and silences, with the unspoken language of trust weaving its cautious thread between two wounded souls. Runa shifted, her gaze careful, searching. "The mark on your chest. I have seen it in the visions. It is not only a curse. It is a sign, a bond to Hela herself." Ragnar's breath caught. The black mark, a twisted hand with fingers like roots stretching beneath his skin, throbbed faintly beneath the fabric of his tunic. For so long, it had been a symbol of his torment, a brand that isolated him from the world, a beacon of death's cold embrace. She stepped closer, her small hand reaching tentatively toward the opening in his tunic. Ragnar did not pull away. Instead, he felt the strange warmth of her touch, a thread of connection piercing the darkness that suffocated him. Some say the dead do not claim those who bear the mark, Runa whispered, that they are chosen to walk between worlds, to carry a light into the shadows. Ragnar's eyes narrowed, the skepticism that had hardened his heart warring with a flicker of something else. Hope, perhaps, or desperation. The child's belief was a fragile thing, but in this moment, it offered a lifeline. The firelight danced across their faces, casting flickering shadows that seemed to breathe with the pulse of ancient secrets. For a long while, neither spoke, the silence filled with the rhythm of shared pain and unspoken promises. Ragnar's gaze drifted to the amulet that now lay forgotten on the rough table, the talisman he had shattered in anger days before. Its broken form seemed to mock his despair, yet within him, a quiet resolve began to stir. He reached for a small bowl filled with water, rough hands dipping into wet a cloth. Gently, he knelt beside Runa, dabbing at the dirt smearing her face. She flinched at first, then relaxed beneath the tender care, the simple act bridging the gulf between them. "You have run far," he said softly, more to himself than to her. "You carry more than just scars on your skin." Runa nodded, eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I carry my mother's legacy and the weight of the gods' will." Ragnar looked away briefly, swallowing the lump that rose unbidden in his throat. For all his battle-hardened exterior, the sight of this small girl, so burdened and yet so fierce, unsettled something deep within, the part of him that still clung to a flicker of humanity. He wondered if that flicker could grow into a flame strong enough to burn away the shadows that threatened to consume them both. Outside, the wind moaned against the walls, but inside, the cabin held a fragile peace. Ragnar fetched a rough woolen cloak, wrapping it around Runa's slender shoulders. The weight of the fabric was a small comfort against the chill that never truly left her. She looked up at him, eyes searching for answers he could not yet provide. "Will they come again?" she asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ragnar's jaw tightened. "They will come. Thorkell does not forget. But you will keep me safe?" The question hung in the air, fragile as a whispered prayer. For a moment, Ragnar said nothing, the turmoil within him raging like a storm behind calm eyes. Then, slowly he nodded. "Yes, as long as I draw breath." The words were a vow, heavy with meaning. A promise forged not in the heat of battle, but in the quiet moments of care and trust. Runa settled closer to the fire, the warmth seeping into her bones. Ragnar watched her, feeling the weight of his own darkness pressing less heavily, softened by the fragile light of this unexpected alliance. In the stillness, the mark on his chest pulsed faintly, a silent witness to a power neither fully understood yet. And in that moment, beneath the shadow of gods and men, two souls found a fragile hope in the midst of the encroaching night. The dawn light crept slowly over the jagged horizon, casting a cold glow that seeped into the narrow streets and wooden homes of Kattegat. The village stirred awake, its usual murmur of daily life tempered by an unfamiliar tension. Whispers spread like wildfire, carried on the breath of fishermen, traders, and shield maidens alike. Rumors of Ragnar Skullcrusher harboring the fugitive girl, Runa, had crossed the lips of frightened watchers well before the sun had fully risen. The mead halls, usually filled with boisterous laughter and song, now thrummed with uneasy conversations. Men leaned in close, voices low but heavy with suspicion and fear. Some spoke of Thorkell's wrath, others of the cursed Berserker's madness. The name Ragnar Skullcrusher was uttered with a mixture of dread and reluctant respect, a man once feared for his unstoppable fury, now seen through the dark lens of his curse and recent defiance. At the edge of the village, near the huts of the elder families, Sigrid paced restlessly. Her face bore the weight of sleepless nights and grim decisions. Though her blue eyes searched the horizon for any sign of danger, it was the turmoil within that gnawed at her most fierce. They came not with weapons raised, but with questions that cut deeper than any blade. When they reached the clearing where Ragnar's cabin stood solitary against the forest's edge, the group halted. The scent of burning wood and the faint trace of smoke lingered in the air, mingling with the wild fragrance of pine and frost. Egil stepped forward, his voice low but commanding. "Ragnar Skullcrusher, we have come to speak." Inside, Ragnar sat by the fire, the black mark on his chest still faintly glowing beneath the worn tunic. Runa sat close, her small hands clutching the leather cords she was braiding, each knot a silent prayer against the gathering storm. The cabin door creaked open, and Ragnar's sharp blue eyes met Egil's steady gaze. It was a moment heavy with unspoken history and fragile trust. "Speak your words," Ragnar said, voice gravelly but controlled. Egil hesitated before speaking. The village fears for its safety. Thorkell's men grow restless and angry. They say you hide the girl, that you defy the will of our people. The council demands answers. Ragnar's jaw tightened. He knew the price of defiance all too well. "Runa seeks only safety," he replied. "Thorkell would see her dead before the battle. I will not hand her over to die." A murmur rippled through the small company, faces etched with conflict. One of the hunters, a broad-shouldered man named Halvard, spoke up. "You risk more than your own life, Berserker. The village is fragile. Thorkell's wrath could burn us all." Ragnar's fists clenched, the faint pulse of his cursed mark quickening. "I am marked by Hela," he said, voice low but unwavering. "My fate is bound to hers. I will not let fear or shame dictate my actions." Egil's eyes softened, but his voice remained firm. "We can only protect you so long as the village does not turn fully against you. The longer you harbor the girl, the more danger you bring upon us all." Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying whispers of the coming storm. Ragnar knew the truth behind Egil's words. His choice to protect Runa was no longer a secret, and soon, the world beyond their isolated clearing would come crashing down. That night, as the fire sputtered and the cabin walls held their fragile warmth, Ragnar stared into the flickering flames. The weight of the village's suspicion settled heavily upon him, mingling with the relentless presence of the mark on his chest. Runa, sensing his turmoil, moved closer, her gray eyes searching his. "They will come," she said softly. "The others. They fear what they do not understand." Ragnar nodded, exhaustion carving deep lines into his face. "And Thorkell will not forget." Her small hand brushed against his arm, steadying him with a quiet strength beyond her years. "Then we prepare, not just to fight with axe and sword, but to fight for what is right." Over the following days, the village's unease grew. Traders from distant lands lingered longer at the docks, their eyes flickering with curiosity and caution. Rival clans sent scouts closer to the borders, sensing weakness in Kattegat's fragile heart. Ragnar found himself caught between worlds, an outcast bound by a curse, a protector caught in the crossfire of old alliances and new threats. The faces of his former comrades flickered in his memories, some offering silent judgment, others veiled sympathy. But none dared openly stand with the Berserker marked by death. Sigrid remained his stalwart ally, her presence a balm against the encroaching isolation. She worked tirelessly, weaving messages of caution and hope alike, her voice steady in the councils, and her hands busy with the chores that mattered most to their survival. "You carry a heavy burden," she said one evening as they sat by the fire, her fingers tracing the delicate runes Runa had braided into cords. "But you are not alone." Ragnar's eyes met hers, the raw vulnerability beneath his hardened exterior momentarily laid bare. "Sometimes I wonder if I have any place left in this world," he admitted. "If I am doomed to be hunted by gods and men alike." Sigrid's gaze was unwavering. "There is always a choice. even for those marked by darkness. As the days slipped forward, the tension in Kattegat thickened like the gathering clouds before a storm. Whispers of rebellion stirred among the villagers, and shadowed figures watched from the woods. Thorkell's name was spoken with venom and fear in equal measure, his fanaticism a looming specter ready to descend. Then, one gray morning, a rider arrived. His cloak was tattered, his face smeared with grime and exhaustion. His voice was urgent as he sought Sigurd first. Thorkell moved swiftly. He warned, eyes darting like a cornered wolf. He gathers men from distant clans, swearing vengeance. The time before his assault grows short. The village's fragile peace fractured under the weight of the news. Men sharpened blades, women readied provisions, and whispers turned to prayers. Yet beneath the preparation, Ragnar's silence spoke volumes. The burden of protecting Runa and confronting Thorkell's wrath had settled into his bones like a cold shackle. In the quiet moments before nightfall, Ragnar stood at the edge of the fjord, the cold wind biting through his worn cloak. Runa sat beside him, her small hands twisting the leather cords, her gaze fixed on the dark waters. "Do you think they will understand?" he asked, voice barely more than a breath. Runa looked up, eyes shining with quiet certainty. "They will come to see. But first, we must stand. Together." The mark on Ragnar's chest pulsed faintly beneath the thin fabric, a living symbol of the path he had chosen, one that led not to exile or death, but to a reckoning far greater than any battle fought with steel. As night fell over Kattegat, the village held its breath. The storm was no longer distant. It had arrived, and with it, the choices that would define the fate of a berserker marked by death, a girl destined for sacrifice, and a land caught between the old gods and the coming darkness. The gray dawn crept reluctantly over Kattegat, casting long shadows that stretched like fingers across the village. The air was thick with unease, a silence oppressive and brittle, as if the very earth itself held its breath. Word had spread swiftly through the narrow streets and clustered wooden homes. Ragnar Skullcrusher sheltered the girl, Runa, the seer marked for death by Thorkell's fanatical decree. The once boisterous hum of village life was replaced by murmurs of suspicion and fear, eyes darting in guarded glances, whispers laced with doubt and accusation. Ragnar sat within his cabin, the black mark on his chest dull beneath the cloth but ever present, a dark pulse beneath the surface of his skin. The fire crackled low, its warmth doing little to chase away the cold gnawing at his bones. His gaze was fixed on the braided leather cord in Runa's small hands, the rune she had woven into it a fragile talisman against the approaching storm. The girl's gray eyes, steady and somber beyond her years, met his, and in that silent exchange, a fragile defiance took root. Outside, the first harsh voices sounded like thunder rolling across the fjord. Heavy footsteps, boots grinding into frost-hardened earth, drew near. The door shuddered beneath a solid blow, wood splintering against the force. Ragnar rose, muscles taut, heart a steady drum of relentless resolve. The berserker's fury slumbered beneath his skin, a tempest kept tethered, but ready to surge. Ragnar Skullcrusher. The voice sliced through the quiet, jagged and merciless. You harbor a traitor and a witch. Surrender the girl, or face the wrath of Kattegat. Egil stepped into the cabin's threshold, his face shadowed with sorrow, but his resolve unyielding. Behind him, a small company of hunters and warriors pressed close, blades sheathed but hands restless, eyes sharp with suspicion. Ragnar's sister, Sigrid, stood at the edge of the group, her pale face etched with worry but her gaze unwavering as it met her brother's. "I have no quarrel with you, Egil," Ragnar said, voice low, rough like gravel. "But I will not betray the child. Thorkell's madness must not claim her." Egil's jaw tightened, torn between duty to his village and the bond of old friendship. "The council has declared you a Nithling, Ragnar." Without honor, without protection. They say you endanger us all. The word hung in the air, heavier than any axe. To be declared Nifling, Ragnar met Thorkell's gaze without flinching, the black mark on his chest burning faintly as if alive, a dark flame flickering beneath his skin. Around him, the warriors of Kattegat shifted uneasily, caught between loyalty and fear. Some gripped their weapons tightly. Others hesitated, their eyes flickering with doubt. I choose my own fate, Ragnar declared, voice cold steel. Runa is under my protection. She will not be sacrificed to your madness. Thorkell laughed, a sound devoid of mercy. You are no longer the Berserker we knew. You are a shadow, a weakling chained by death. I will burn that mark from your flesh and scatter your bones before the sun rises again. Steel rang against steel as the warriors surged forward, a tide of chaos and fury breaking upon the fragile defenses of the cabin's clearing. Ragnar's breath hitched, the familiar roar of Berserker fury rising like a storm tide within him. But this time, the rage was tempered by purpose and control, guided by the steady presence of Runa at his side. Hold fast, she whispered fiercely, her small hand gripping his arm, grounding him like an anchor. Let the fury serve you, not consume you. The battle was brutal but precise. Ragnar moved with terrifying grace, a whirlwind of controlled savagery. He struck hard, but did not kill. Each blow a message, a warning carved into flesh and bone. Around him, the warriors fell back wounded, confusion rippling through their ranks. Thorkell's fanaticism clashed with Ragnar's fierce resolve, a clash not only of steel but of spirit. At last, Ragnar faced Thorkell alone in the center of the clearing. The two men locked eyes, the weight of their shared history and bitter enmity hanging heavy between them. Thorkell swung fiercely, desperate to end the challenge and crush what he saw as a heresy. Ragnar parried, feeling the thrumming pulse of the mark guiding him, shaping the battle. When the dust settled, Thorkell knelt, disarmed and breathing hard. His eyes burned with a mixture of rage and disbelief. Kill me. Show the world the monster you truly are. He spat, his voice broken. Ragnar's grip tightened around the hilt of his axe, the beast inside roaring for blood. Yet, in that moment, clarity surged through him like fire and ice. He stepped back, releasing the man to his defeat. I am no monster, Ragnar said, voice steady. I am a man who chooses what he becomes. Silence fell over the clearing as Thorkell's war party retreated, beaten and humiliated. The threat of their return lingered like a dark cloud, but for now, the storm had passed. As the first pale light of morning spread across the fjord, Ragnar sat beside Runa, the weight of what had been won settling among the ashes of conflict. The mark on his chest no longer pulsed with torment, but with a quiet promise, a bond not of shame, but of purpose. We stand at a crossroads, Runa said softly, weaving another knot into her leather cord. The path ahead is uncertain, but you do not walk it alone. Ragnar's gaze swept the horizon, the cold wind carrying the scent of the sea and the distant cries of ravens. The past would not easily release him, nor would the gods rest from their watchful gaze. Yet, within the crucible of fire and shadow, a new chapter had begun, one forged not in bloodlust, but in the fierce light of choice. The road ahead was fraught with peril and sacrifice, but for the first time in many moons, Ragnar Skullcrusher knew this. He was no longer a prisoner of his curse. He was its master, and with Runa by his side, the night was no longer an enemy, but a canvas upon which to write a future. The dawn deepened, and the village of Kattegat stirred anew, its fate entwined with the Berserker marked by death and the seer who carried the echoes of the gods. Together, they would face the darkness, not as victims, but as warriors of their own destiny. The air hung heavy with the cold breath of early morning, the gray light filtering through heavy clouds that clung low over the fjord. Inside the cabin, A fragile silence settled, broken only by the soft crackling of embers in the hearth and the slow, steady breaths of its two occupants. Ragnar sat near the fire, his posture weary yet resolute. The black mark on his chest, once a menacing brand of torment, now pulsed with a gentle rhythm, as if accepting the fragile peace that had begun to take root. Runa, small and still wrapped in the coarse woolen cloak, looked up at him with quiet understanding. Her fingers, nimble and sure, continued weaving the leather cords inscribed with runes, symbols of protection and resilience, each not a prayer that bound them both to a new hope. The events of the past days lingered like a storm's aftershocks, echoing in the spaces between their words. Kattegat had been shaken, its fragile trust splintered by fear and suspicion. Yet, despite the threats, the accusations, and the shadow cast by Thorkell's fanaticism, here they remained, two souls intertwined by fate's cruel hand and the promise of something deeper than mere survival. Ragnar's voice broke the silence, low and rough, thick with the weight of confession. "I never asked for this mark," he said, his gaze darkening as his fingers brushed the blackened skin beneath his tunic. "For so long, I believed it was a curse, a sentence meant to strip me of everything I held dear. Honor, kin, my very humanity." He paused, eyes flickering toward the girl. "But you said it could be something else. A bond, a reminder." Runa nodded solemnly, her gray eyes steady even against the flickering firelight. "The gods do not always speak in clear words, and their gifts are often wrapped in shadows. The mark is not just death, but a call, a chance to walk between worlds, to carry both the light and the darkness." A faint tremor crossed Ragnar's features, as if the weight of those words was both a balm and a burden. "I have fought the monster inside for so long," he admitted, voice cracking. "Each night, the screams haunt me. The faces of the innocent the first could not protect, or worse, those I destroyed." His breath caught, and for a moment, the cabin was filled with the heavy stillness of grief. Runa's hand reached out, delicate but unwavering, resting on his arm. "You are not the sum of your fury," she said gently. "You are the one who chooses what to do with it. That choice is your true strength." Ragnar's eyes, sharp and stormy, met hers. For the first time in many moons, he allowed himself to hope. Not the fleeting hope born from desperation, but something steadier, forged in the crucible of shared pain and understanding. Outside, the faint rustling of footsteps approached, tentative and cautious. Ragnar's muscles tensed instinctively, but the door creaked open slowly, revealing Sigrid's familiar figure. Her face was lined with worry, but relief softened the edges. "I have spoken with the council," she said, stepping inside and closing the door gently behind her. "There has been much debate, but your actions have not gone unnoticed." She paused, her voice steady despite the emotion she carried. "You saved a child. You stood against Thorkell and his madness. You showed the village a courage that few dared to hope for." Ragnar's jaw tightened, a shadow crossing his gaze. "It may not be enough," he said quietly. "The mark still brands me an outcast. Some say I am cursed beyond redemption." Sigrid knelt beside him, her hands clasping his own in a rare gesture of tenderness. "The gods marked you, yes, but the people choose what you mean to them. And you have shown us all that even the darkest marks can be worn with honor." Runa watched the exchange silently, her presence a steady beacon between the siblings. Then, from the doorway, footsteps echoed again, a cautious shuffling that grew into a measured approach. Egil stepped in, eyes grave but carrying the faintest glimmer of respect. "I have come with a message," he said, voice low but clear. "The council has agreed to withdraw the declaration of Nifling, for now. Your defense of the girl, and your stand against Thorkell, have reminded us all what it means to be bound by honor." Relief flickered in Ragnar's chest. mingled with the lingering sting of mistrust still simmering in the village's undercurrent. For now, he echoed, knowing well that peace was fragile, like thin ice over dark waters. Egil nodded. But, for the first time, sleep came without the torment of nightmares. The darkness was still there, lurking beyond the edges of his mind, but it no longer held dominion over his soul. And as the winds whispered through the ancient trees, carrying tales of gods and men, Ragnar Skullcrusher, once cursed, now chosen, closed his eyes. Not as a prisoner of fate, but as a man ready to shape his own destiny. The frost still clung stubbornly to the edges of the thatched roofs in Kattegat as the village stirred to life beneath a pale, hesitant sun. The long, dark nights of winter had not yet lifted fully, but a subtle change was in the air, a fragile breath of renewal that whispered through the narrow streets and timbered homes. The people moved cautiously, their steps measured, as if carrying the weight of recent trials within their bones. Yet beneath the surface, a deeper current ran, one woven from threads of hope and hard-won understanding. Ragnar Skullcrusher stood at the edge of the village, his broad frame silhouetted against the shimmering fjord. The black mark on his chest, once a symbol of torment and isolation, now felt less like a curse and more like a quiet ember, smoldering but contained, a reminder of battles fought within and without. His eyes, sharp and intense, scanned the horizon where water met sky, the cold wind tugging at his tangled dark blonde hair. Beside him, Runa sat weaving slowly, her small fingers deftly knotting the leather cords inscribed with runes of protection and courage. The pair had become a fixture within the village, no longer shadows on the outskirts, but threads woven into the fabric of Kattegat's fragile community. The council's reluctant acceptance of Ragnar had not come easily, nor had the lingering suspicion that clung to many. But the events of the past weeks, the defiance of Thorkell's fanaticism, the tenderness Ragnar showed toward a child marked by the gods, had softened hardened hearts. Whispers now spoke not just of a cursed berserker, but of a man grappling with his dark fate and choosing to stand for something greater. In the mead hall, the air was thick with the scent of roasting meat and burning pine. The long wooden tables bore the scars of many winters, their surfaces polished by countless hands and stories shared. Tonight, the hall was filled with laughter tinged with relief, the kind that comes after storms have passed, but before the calm fully sets in. Sigrid moved with quiet grace among the gathered families, her ice-blue eyes alight with cautious optimism. She paused at the center, raising a horn of mead for silence. "Let us honor those who stood when the night was darkest." She spoke, voice steady and clear. Ragnar Skullcrusher, marked by gods and men alike, chose to protect what is pure, life itself. And Runa, whose courage shines beyond her years, reminds us that even the smallest flame can light the deepest shadow. A swell of murmurs followed, some tentative, others genuine. For the first time in many moons, Kattegat's people glimpsed the possibility of healing, not just in body, but in spirit. Outside, the snow began to fall once more, soft flakes drifting down to blanket the earth in quiet white. Yet this winter's cold held no menace. Rather, it wrapped the world in a stillness that promised rest and reflection. Ragnar and Runa lingered by the fire pit near the village square, the glow casting long shadows that danced across their faces. Around them, children played cautiously, their laughter ringing clear and bright like a balm to wounds unseen. Runa looked up at Ragnar, her voice a gentle thread weaving between the crackle of flames. "The mark remains, but it no longer screams with the voice of death. It whispers now, of balance, of power held in restraint." Ragnar's gaze softened, tracing the lines of her young face, marked by wisdom far beyond her years. "It is a reminder," he agreed quietly, "that even those touched by darkness can choose the path of light." Their quiet moment was broken by the arrival of Egil, the village scout, his weathered face etched with the hardships of many seasons. He nodded respectfully, carrying news that rippled through Kattegat's newfound calm. Thorkell's forces have withdrawn beyond the borders, Egil reported, voice low but firm. His threat lingers, no doubt, but for now, Kattegat stands united. A flicker of relief passed between Ragnar and Runa. The road ahead was far from certain, yet the village's fragile truce with its own fears had shifted the tide. No longer would the Berserker be hunted as a monster, nor the young seer condemned as a sacrifice. Sigrid joined them then, her presence steady and grounding. The village still watches closely, but the stories told now speak of courage, of choice over fate, she said. You have given them reason to hope. Ragnar's jaw tightened, the weight of past sins settling briefly like a shadow at his feet. Hope is a fragile thing, he said softly. It must be guarded as fiercely as any shield. Then we guard it together, Sigrid replied, eyes shining with conviction. In the days that followed, the rhythms of Kattegat began to mend. The mead halls filled with song, the smithies rang with hammer against anvil, and the docks echoed with the calls of fishermen readying their boats. Old traditions, once frayed by fear and fanaticism, found new life with tempered meaning. The sacrifice rites that Thorkell had sought to revive were quietly abandoned, replaced by ceremonies that honored both the gods and the sanctity of life. Runa's role grew quietly but steadily. Her runic knowledge and visions, once feared and misunderstood, became a source of guidance. She taught the village's children the ancient runes, not as tools of magic, but as symbols carrying stories of strength, resilience, and protection. Her presence was a living bridge between the old ways and the new dawn. One evening, as the long shadows stretched and the sky blushed with the soft hues of twilight, Ragnar found himself alone by the shore. The icy water lapped gently at the rocks, the distant cries of seabirds echoing over the fjord. The mark on his chest pulsed faintly beneath his tunic, a steady heartbeat entwined with his own. He reached down, fingers brushing the darkened skin, feeling the warmth beneath the cold. Memories surged unbidden, the screams, the blood, the fury he had once known so well. But beneath that turmoil lay something else, a quiet resolve born of struggle and survival. A sudden, soft sound behind him drew his gaze. Runa approached, her steps light but determined. The gods watch over those who walk the line, she said, voice barely above the wind's whisper. They see your fight, Ragnar. Not the rage, but the man beneath. He nodded, the faintest of smiles touching his lips, a rare and fragile thing. Perhaps we are both marked to carry burdens others cannot bear. She looked up at him, eyes bright with a clarity that belied her youth. And to forge paths others dare not walk. The night settled around them, a vast canopy dotted with cold stars. The village behind them rested, its people unaware of the quiet pact being forged between two souls bound by fate and choice. As the seasons turned, the story of Ragnar Skullcrusher and Runa spread beyond Kattegat's borders, not as tales of curses and sacrifice, but as legends of redemption and strength. Travelers whispered of the Berserker who tamed his fury, and the seer who held the ancient wisdom of the old gods. Their names became symbols, not of fear, but of hope. In the years that followed, the village would remember this time as a turning point, a moment when darkness met light, and the line between monster and man blurred into something new. Ragnar took his place among the people once more, a warrior not defined by his rage, but by his choice to protect and rebuild. Sigrid remained his steadfast ally, her own strength a pillar for the family and the village. Together, they worked to heal old wounds and forge new alliances, honoring the gods not with blood alone, but with acts of courage and mercy. And Runa, the child once marked for death, blossomed into a wise woman, keeper of runes, seer of hidden truths, and guardian of the fragile balance between worlds. Her presence was a living testament to the power of belief and the enduring strength found in choosing life over destruction. The cold night air clung to the skin like a thin veil, carrying with it the scent of pine and distant seas. The fire, now reduced to glowing embers, lent a faint warmth to the cabin's worn wooden walls. Shadows flickered gently, casting long, shifting shapes that danced with the quiet rhythm of the crackling flames. Ragnar sat near the hearth, his breathing slow, steady, unlike the restless nights that had haunted him for so long. Beside him, Runa's hands moved with practiced grace, weaving delicate patterns into the leather cords she carried. Her fingers nimbly tied runes of protection and strength, each knot a silent prayer that seemed to pull the darkness away from the small room. The child's eyes, pale and steady, held an ancient wisdom far beyond her years. Yet beneath that wisdom was a fragile hope, delicate and shimmering like the first light of dawn. For the first time in many moons, silence did not weigh heavy between them. It was a quiet companion, one born not of fear, but of understanding. Ragnar's gaze drifted to the dark mark on his chest, the black twisted hand that had once felt like a curse, a brand of torment. Now it pulsed softly beneath the fabric, a steady heartbeat entwined with his own. The mark had changed, no longer a symbol of doom, but a reminder of the path he had chosen. A path not of destruction, but of control, of purpose. The years of torment, the blood spilled in fury and madness, seemed to ebb away, replaced by a fragile peace that tasted like hope. I never thought I would see the day when this would feel less like a chain and more like a shield, he confessed quietly, his voice rough but calm. When the rage inside me could be something more than a curse. Runa looked up, a small smile brushing her lips. The gods' gifts are never simple. They test us not to break us, but to forge us into what we must become. Her words lingered in the air, carrying weight beyond their simplicity. Ragnar nodded slowly, feeling the truth in them settle deep within his bones. Outside, the faint rustle of the wind whispered through the trees, a gentle reminder of the world beyond these walls, one that was still harsh and uncertain. Yet, within this small sanctuary, a new chapter had begun. Sigrid's footsteps echoed softly as she entered, her presence a steady warmth in the cold cabin. Her eyes, bright and filled with quiet resolve, met Ragnar's with a familiar tenderness. "You have come far, brother," she said softly, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Not in miles, but in strength, and in heart." Ragnar's lips twitched into a rare, faint smile. "I could not have done this without you. Without Runa." Sigrid's gaze softened as she looked at the girl. "She has brought light where there was only shadow." The three sat together, the firelight weaving a fragile comfort around them. The past still whispered in the corners of their minds, the screams, the blood, the awful weight of what had been lost. Yet now, those shadows no longer ruled. A quiet strength had taken root here, nurtured by trust, faith, and the unyielding will to reclaim honor from despair. Days turned into weeks, and the village of Kattegat began to breathe with cautious relief. Tales of Ragnar's stand spread slowly, no longer as stories of madness and curse, but as legends of redemption and choice. The people, wary but longing for hope, looked upon the Berserker marked by death with a new kind of respect. Thorkell's shadow lingered still, distant but ominous, a reminder that darkness never truly fades. But Ragnar was no longer the man broken by his rage. He was a man who had faced the abyss and chosen to walk forward in the dawn. On a crisp morning, Ragnar and Runa stood at the edge of the fjord, the cold water reflecting the pale sky. The wind tugged gently at their hair and clothes as they gazed out over the still, endless horizon. Runa's voice broke the silence, soft but steady. The mark will never leave you, but it does not own you. Ragnar's hands traced the faint outline beneath his tunic. It's a reminder of what I was and what I can become. She smiled, the faintest light in her eyes. And what you choose to be. The two turned from the fjord, stepping back toward the village that had once cast them out. Their path was uncertain, fraught with old wounds and new battles yet to come. But together, they carried a strength that no curse could claim, a strength born of facing darkness and choosing to stand. As the sun climbed higher, its light spilled across the village, chasing away the lingering shadows. The air was filled with the sounds of life, voices, laughter, the steady beat of hammers on anvil, and beneath it all, the quiet pulse of hope. Ragnar felt the warmth seep into his bones, a fire not of rage, but of resolve. In the long, cold nights ahead, he would face the darkness again. But now, he was no longer lost within it. The mark of Hela was not his prison. It was his bond to the gods, to the living world, and to the fragile spark of humanity he refused to lose. The story of the Berserker and the seer would echo through the ages, not as a tale of curses fulfilled, but as a testament to the power of choice. In a world ruled by fate and fury, the greatest strength lay in the courage to embrace both shadow and light, and to walk forward no matter how long the night. If this story stirred the fire of your own spirit, if the struggles of Ragnar and Runa moved you, then join us on this journey. Subscribe, share, and stand with us as we delve deeper into the shadows and light of Viking honor and humanity. For in the end, the fiercest battles are not fought with blades, but within the heart. And as the old worlds fade and new legends rise, remember this. Sometimes, the greatest warriors are those who choose mercy over wrath, hope over despair. In the quiet between the storm and the dawn, there lies a truth worth holding on to. The night is long, but so is the light. Thank you for walking this path with us. Until the next story unfolds, may your spirit never yield.
If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to subscribe. We're just getting started and we really need your support. And may the gods grant you a legendary life.